Welcome to Legacy Makers, a conversation for dads. This is a space for building community and for honest conversations about fatherhood, the wins, the struggles, and the responsibility of building something that outlives us. Each episode, we sit down with leaders, dads, and friends to talk about family, fatherhood, and the kind of men our kids need us to be, because legacy isn't accidental, it's built.
All right, here we are back, Legacy Makers. Eric, last time we talked about building a foundation and what that looks like, and today we have one of our favorite people in the world here with us. We have David Salyers, the legend, the GOAT. In all things business, marketing, entrepreneurship, but also as a dad, which is probably your most important title. So, and you guys have known each other for how long, Eric?
About 10 years. David and I crossed paths when I had the privilege of working very closely with our friends at Chick-fil-A. And here's what I'll say, and then we're going to get into it. I think David is responsible for really the light bulb moment for me to understand that there is absolute synergies and intersection in work and purpose. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that existed before interacting with David and spending time with the great folks at Chick-fil-A. I just kind of work was this thing on the side. It was a lane in my life that meant, hey, I'm going to get these things, I'm going to accumulate, but there's real intersection there. And to what you said too, I can remember my kid's much younger at that point, and hearing David talk about his family and the intentionality and being like, man, this was a real important moment in my life to see that and that stage to help me think about roots I was putting down. So excited to have you on and drop some wisdom for our guests.
Well, you know, a close corollary of that is, fortunately, having worked for Chick-fil-A for 37 years, I was surrounded by amazing leaders, but I was surrounded by amazing parents.
Yeah.
And what I realized is a lot of the things I learned at Chick-fil-A in a business context, even more valuable as a dad. And we'll get into some of those principles today. But you know, the reality is a lot of principles, whether they're work or, you know, they're life principles, and they work at work, and they're biblical principles, and they work at work, and they work in your personal life. But I got exposed to a lot of principles at work that I applied in our family.
I love
awesome. Since we're talking about foundation, maybe, David, will you just go back and tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your foundation?
Yeah. Gosh. You know, I came up with a very lower middle class background. You know, went to the public schools, public high school, went to Wake Forest University for a couple of years, and ended up during that time getting a summer internship at Six Flags Over Georgia, and which was an amazing thing because I was surrounded by some amazing leaders. I fell in love with marketing. At the time I went to Wake Forest, I thought I wanted to be an attorney because my dad was an attorney and then a federal judge. My brother was an attorney or studying to be an attorney, and I thought that's what I wanted to do, and fell in love with marketing. Ended up transferring to the University of Georgia.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs. Because I wanted to get into the marketing get a marketing major in the business school. There I met a guy named Woody Falk, who we all know, and Woody had been orphaned at age 13. Met a guy named Truett Cathy, as in Truett's Sunday school class at age 13. They had become good friends. He introduced me. I ended up getting hired by Truett and Chick-fil-A right out of college. I tell people I graduated on a Saturday morning at the time, started 4 hours later at Chick-fil-A, and it was nothing like the Chick-fil-A you know of today. The headquarters was a converted air freight warehouse. Like 10 walls, 10 roof. They'd run out of room in the warehouse, so they cut a hole through the wall, pulled up a mobile home, and my first house was in a mobile home attached to a warehouse, and then got to see that story unfold at Chick-fil-A and got exposure to Truett Cathy. Truett became much like a second father to me. A lot of my love for business and passion for business, the principles I learned, I learned all that from Truett. And interestingly, too, Truett in January of my senior year in college hired a guy named Steve Robinson to start a marketing department at Chick-fil-A. Well, Steve had been the director of marketing at Six Flags, where I had been an intern for the last 3 summers. So I knew Steve. I didn't work as much with Steve. I worked for somebody. But all of a sudden, Steve Robinson is the director of marketing for Chick-fil-A. I'm hired to be kind of the first person in the marketing department under Steve. And at that time, just the two of us were the entire marketing department. And the rest, as they say, is history.
I love thinking about, and this is a little aside, but I try to challenge myself to think a little bit and look in the rearview mirror, because there's these intersectional moments that we miss if we're not. And I hear your story, and I know the impact you've made home, but in the workplace, and made an impact on me personally. All of the impact based on these little intersectional moments. Hey, I'm going to go do this internship at Six Flags, and that turns into this, and that turns into that. I mean, transferring from Wake to Georgia, where you met Woody, who then helped. It's just amazing when you start thinking about each of our individual stories. These divine intersections, I think, is what they are, actually.
Yeah.
There's no question. You know, Eric, there's a great expression that I love, that life has to be lived forward, but is best understood in reverse. And so many times we're living life forward, and many times the rough times are the ones that are really hard to figure out, but so many times we've all seen it. You know, some of the toughest things in life that ever happened, you look back later, one of the best things that ever happened, but you can't see it at that time. I like to think that we see life like as a frame in a movie, and God sees the whole movie.
Yeah.
And if we don't like the frame we're in, God's up there saying, hold on, you know, wait till you see what this turns out to, but you can't see it at the moment.
Yeah.
Like in a movie.
Totally. And I would just like pause as you're listening to this, dads, that is it's such a parallel to fatherhood, especially in the early years, where you know, we're used to feedback loops that are pretty quick when it comes to work, or I did this project and did it go well, or took my wife on a date and it was a good date. As dads, the feedback loop sometimes is pretty long, and you got to stay encouraged in those tough times because you're building something that's much longer out there, the final product.
That's really where faith comes in, because I've lived long enough to see how many of those, you know, terrible times and tough times turned out to be the most amazing thing. And that's where your faith comes in, is to have faith that regardless of what's happening now, doesn't mean that's where it's going to end up.
I love it.
Okay, so we can go anywhere you want with this, but I'm going to ask you a couple questions just because of things that I know about you. So we're talking about a foundation, and I remember you and I having a conversation. So just context for people that maybe are not as familiar with Chick-fil-A or Atlanta. Chick-fil-A's corporate office is down on the south side of Atlanta near the airport. You made a decision when you got married and had a family to live in Alpharetta. Now, if you're not familiar with Atlanta, that's not close. And in Atlanta traffic, it's even further away. And you have shared with me before about making that decision. It feels foundational for work being important, but the rest of your life being important. Just unpack that
That's a great little example. So it was a long drive down to Chick-fil-A every day. But what I had to wrestle with is I felt like I had to go to work. So I would be willing to be inconvenienced to go to work. But there are a lot of other things in my life: church, friends, family, schools, all those other things that are the more important things would be convenient if I lived on the north side, but inconvenient if I lived on the south side. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to make the trade-off, because all of life is about trade-offs. I'd rather live close to church, friends, family, schools, all those things that are the important things, and make work the inconvenient thing, because I've got to do that anyway. And then at first it was a burden, because Atlanta traffic, for those of you who don't know, may be the worst in the country. And so I used to have sometimes an hour and a half drive to work, and so I had to wrestle through, because I'm one that doesn't like to waste time. Time is the most important thing we have. You can't get it back once it's gone. So I had to figure out a way to make that time in the car productive, or it would have driven me crazy. And initially, it was cassette tapes. For those of you who don't know what a cassette tape is, you can Google it and look it up. But I listened to like motivational, educational tapes.
Zig Ziglar back in the day?
Yeah, Zig Ziglar at one point. But I felt like I made my car my university on wheels. So now it wasn't wasted time, it was educational time. And then later came the cell phone. And the cell phone then allowed you to have meetings, call people. That was my phone booth, you know, or my meeting room. So the whole time I was at Chick-fil-A, I always made that time productive, because to waste that much time would have been inconceivable to me. But there's a way to make what would have been wasted time productive time. But then I was close to the important things in life. But you're right, that was very foundational.
Yeah, and those that phone time you had, you were legendary at Chick-fil-A. So this is, again, I know this is for some of our younger people, there were voicemails, like physical lines, but you would leave these legendary, now people are like, why did you leave me a message? Just text me. But you would leave these encouraging messages. And so I think that's important. So just context, you're married to Lynn. You guys have been married how long?
37 years.
Okay, and you have 3 kids that are now how old?
Let's see, 34, 32, and 26.
Okay, and all just amazing. 1 girl, 2 boys, and I've had the privilege, I know 2 of them pretty well. I've met all of them, and they're just amazing. So you obviously have done really well in this legacy making thing.
Yeah. Well, one foundational principle that someone shared with me that I want to, somebody shared with me early on: never take too much credit or too much blame for how your kids. So many times we feel this pressure that it's all on us for them to turn out well, and then if they do, we take way too much credit because it's really them, not me or Lynn. But at the same time is we've had some friends, who have kids, and 2 of the 3 turned out really well, but they all were parented the same way. They all went to the same school. Everything was the same, but one of them didn't turn out so well. And I think it's really a problem when you take too much credit for the way your kids turn out or too much blame. You need to do what you can, to create the conditions, but ultimately they're going to make some decisions, and they're independent individuals.
You know what I love about that? I think some of the inherent pressure we feel as dads is because we're so outcome driven. It's all about the outcome. It's how they're going to turn out. Are they going to make the team? Did they do well at the thing? Are they whatever it might be? It's so outcome driven because that's how most of us that are working in some capacity. We're outcome driven. Yes. What I'm hearing you shift is, yes, the outcome's important, but be more focused on your output.
Yes.
And focus there, and that's where you should have pressure versus what could be.
And create the circumstances for them to succeed. But that doesn't mean that they will. You've just created the circumstances. I do think we ought to do everything we can to create the circumstances, but then ultimately, they've got to succeed or fail themselves. And that's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
It translates to what I believe is being a great leader in a business setting, right? Create the right culture, the organizational temperature, remove barriers to allow the people to thrive versus you doing that for them.
Yeah, David, maybe this will be helpful. One of the things Eric and I have talked a lot about is there's so much intentionality for us when we come to our work. We're thinking about development. We've got a strategic plan in place. We have all of these kind of things, and that happens in our professional life, but a lot of times our parenting is more by default than by design. It's just we haven't been as intentional in thinking about it. And so you have so many great business principles. I'm curious, as you think about are there some business professional principles that you think about that then could apply to parenting? I just be curious what you got.
100%.
Yeah.
A lot of them. But let me start with one I think based on what we're talking about that's very foundational to everything we're talking about. Stephen Covey came up with the 7 habits of highly effective executives, and one of those was begin with the end in mind. And that is so important as a parent, because I think one of the differences, Eric, for me, with business, because you're quarter to quarter, year to year, you tend to micromanage things because you need an output every quarter and every year. I think with parenting, it's more about macro managing things because you're not going to get an output. In fact, what your kids look like and what their needs are at age 6 and 8 is very different than 38 or whatever. And so it's more of a macro. But one of the principles for me, beginning with the end in mind, is something Andy Stanley shared at one point, his and Sandra's goal as parents. And this was so refreshing to me. It's kind of like, I wish I had been more clear about this early on, but when he said it, it just really resonated with me. He said his goal and Sandra's goal for their kids was when the kids were old enough to where they no longer had to be around each other or had to be around them as parents, they would choose to. Mm-hmm. That's a really good thing to think about. Like, what are we doing along the way so that when our kids are old enough to be independent and they don't have to be around each other, they would choose to. Yeah. And like we're at the age now, our kids, at their age, they could easily be independent of us, but they want to be around us and they want to be around each other. And that's what victory looks like for us. And we're at that stage now. The kids, two of them in their 30s, one of them in his 20s, but they love to be around each other and they love to be around us. And I'll tell you, in this season, you can't imagine how important that is and how much, had I known how important that was, like way back when, I would have given up a lot of things that might look like a victory in the short run to get to that outcome. Because even though we love, kind of short-term victories, are things that pay off in the short run, we got to live in the long run. And it's a great future that we're looking at because our kids at this point love to be around each other and love to be around us.
Yeah, it feels like one of these foundational principles that is coming up already is just the importance of the end in mind, the long term, the long view. It is much easier right now for Kevin and I, with the ages of our kids, to try to get short-term wins, because what short-term wins look like is peace, right? Like, yes, we'll give you that. Yes, okay. But like we've talked a lot about, you parent tight and it's harder early and you start to loosen the reins as they get older to earn the right to be their best friend when they're adults. And what I'm hearing you say is that is like for us, it's hard to even think about that, but you in the seat, just the beautiful moment and season you're in right now, it sounds like it's worth every bit of that.
Yeah. And if that weren't true, oh my goodness, the rest of our lives would be disaster. So it wasn't something I was thinking a lot about when I had kids your age.
Yeah.
But in a sense it was, because Andy kind of planted that seed, but now it's really reaping a harvest.
Can we talk a little bit about the community, the people you're around? I'm thinking still taking business principles and applying them to life. You talk a lot about what people should look for in a job.
Yeah.
Who you're around, who you're becoming.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit, and then talk about how that applies to the dads, because a passion for Eric and I with this podcast is that dads a lot of times are very lonely. They don't have the conversation in the community with other dads to talk about these
Can
things.
I just to build on that?
Yeah.
Lonely from a standpoint, not physical proximity. I think there's dads listening to this that probably have
They go play
a
golf.
ton of people that have a physical proximity to a lot of other dads and men. But the relational proximity, the depth there is just not there for anything. If in fact they need something or need something more than just, hey, let's talk about this business thing, let's go play golf, or just kind of that type of fellowship. And I think that's one of the things we're really trying to reinforce the importance of.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, there was a moment along the way that really became super clear to me. And it was when our kids turned 13, or my boys turned 13 each. I guess the precursor of that is when my two boys were really, really young, I went to a Jewish bar mitzvah. And for those not familiar with the Jewish bar mitzvah, it's a rite of passage into adulthood for a 13-year-old boy, a bat mitzvah for girls. But I was really struck by it that day. It's about, in the Jewish culture, it's as big as a wedding. I mean, people fly in from all over the country. They have big celebrations. It's a huge moment. And the preparation for it is unbelievable. They go through a year of training, and they have to memorize entire books of the Bible in Hebrew and stuff. And so it's the culmination of all that is this bar mitzvah celebration in the synagogue. So we went to that at the invitation of one of our neighbors, and I just remember, I guess the most emotional point, the thing that really grabbed my heart that day was the son had written a letter to his parents, 13-year-old boy, saying, here's what I see in your lives that I want to emulate in mine, and read it in front of the whole group. The parents had written a letter to their son saying, here's what we see in your life and what you have to offer the world. And what they're basically doing is painting a picture of what's really important in life from both people's perspective, and painting a picture for the son of kind of something to live up to and into, and affirming the parents that they're doing some things this child would like to emulate. And there wasn't a dry in the house when those two letters were read. And I was just sobbing. And it's like, this was so powerful for me. And on the way home, I talked to Lynn. I said, why is it Christianity doesn't have something like this? I said, I wish Christianity had a tradition like this at age 13. And so being a little bit of an entrepreneur and being somebody who loves startups and creating things and stuff, I told her, I said, when Nick turns 13, we've got 3 kids, our daughter and then 2 sons. I said, when Nick turns 13, I want to create something like that for him. So sure enough, when he got to be 12, I started partnering with some other dads. And this is what because I knew enough about myself that if a lot of dads think I've got to do it myself. And I kind of felt like that. But I felt if I try and do this myself, it's going nowhere. I needed the accountability of some other dads. And so I found 5 other like-minded dads, and we kind of partnered together. So we're going to create our version of this bar mitzvah ceremony. And so we started, a bunch of bumbling dads. So unlike some people, we didn't have it all planned out. It's like I knew what was going to be important was to begin with the end in mind. We had the final night planned out and the first night. And we said, we're going to figure out most everything in between. And then we divided it up. This was another thing that really helped. I felt if it was all on me, it ain't going to happen. But we had 5 dads, so we could divide the work up, and we would divide sessions up. And we decided we're going to meet every week, on a certain day for a 6-month period of time. And this is getting back to your question. It was magical. And here's the other thing that was really, I probably ought to speak to. At age 13, you guys can appreciate this more than me. You may be at the peak of your stretch. Your career, you're in the middle of your career. Your kids are in the middle of academics and extracurricular. I mean, you've never been more stretched in your life. Who's got time for this? No one's got time for this. And yet, a lot of people take time to coach their kid in baseball or, coach them in basketball or whatever. And some of the guys that were involved, they were coach. And what we came to the conclusion is for most of these kids, baseball is not going to last. Basketball is not going to last, but they have the rest of their life to be a champion in life instead of a champion in baseball or basketball. It seemed so important at that time. And we said, we want to prepare them to be a champion in life. And that's where the name came from. We said, we're going to call this champion training, and we're going to take 6 months. And just as if we were coaching a baseball team or a football team or basketball, we're going to coach these kids what it looks like to be a champion in life from God's perspective and your dad's perspective. We wanted to be crystal clear. At Chick-fil-A, we love to say every life is a story. Well, we wanted to co-author that story at a crucial moment. And here's another thing. You can't do that every minute of every day. It's like certain moments are far more important. We felt like age 13 is a really, really powerful moment. We felt like that's why in the Jewish faith, 13 is the age at which this rite of passage occurs because it's a very moldable, shapeable moment. And I don't want people to feel too burdened. It's like we're a bunch of bumbling dads who are all busy at work, busy doing other things. We just committed to each other that we're going to do this. And we're committed, we're going to figure it out as we go. So the first night was magical. It's kind of like a fraternity initiation ceremony. We had this unbelievable first night, flaming orbs, and we signed documents that we had burnt the edges on and all this stuff and made a big deal of it. A lot of mystery, blindfolds involved, flaming torches, all that kind of stuff. Made it a really big night, so they got very intrigued, very excited about it, and they all committed as well. But then the magic of what you were talking about started to happen. We were doing this for the boys. Turned out it was more important for the dads. Yeah. Because now we had that camaraderie of dads. And if you were going to do this, I'd say it's more important the dads know each other and work well together than the boys. Because the boys can make new friends, but the dads committing to each other was really important. And it became almost like a small group for us. And 6 months turned into 18 months. 6 months turned into 18 months because no one wanted to stop. The dads were getting as much out of it as the boys were. And we invited in speakers. We invited in anybody we respected. We invited them in to come do a 20-minute talk for the boys, and then we'd unpack it out. So that was an easy way to do a lot of it. We said, who are the men we respect? Let's invite them in. We had a book we went through. We did field trips. And we're having so much fun over something that felt so burdensome up front and became pure joy when we got into it.
David, I've heard you for years when you're talking about work. You challenge people when they're thinking about their jobs to not just think about their paycheck. You challenge them to think about the journey they're on, the people they're doing it with, and who they're becoming. You challenge them that at work, but it sounds like this is true as a dad too. Yes. What journey are we on as a dad? Who am I doing it with, and who are we becoming as dads in the process? Okay, We've got so much. I think we ought to come back for another episode and do this again because I feel like we have not even scratched the surface here. So why don't we do this? Let's come back. We're going to add an extra episode and we're going to get more David Salyers gold. This is going to be a lot of fun.